That 18-foot center console you just bought, or you're about to, has a secret. The wire behind its dash, the one connector no dealer walkthrough ever points at, is quietly costing more per year than your slip fee. Not because something's broken, because it's built to look fine, right up until the season it isn't. Here's a number to hold on to: 2.1 amps. That's the draw on a standard 500-gallon-per-hour livewell pump on an 18-foot center console running under 10 feet of wire, round trip. Small number. Doesn't sound like much. Stick with me, because by the end of this video that number is going to explain exactly how a boat owner ends up paying $4,000 a year for rigging that was never built to last. Here's the part that catches most owners off guard. A cheap connector doesn't look cheap. It gets a chrome-plated shell, a heavy-feeling housing, the kind of finish that reads as marine grade the second you run your thumb over it at the dealer. Pop that housing open and there's no tinning on the copper underneath, no proper strain relief, nothing sized to the actual current it's carrying. What you actually want to see in that housing is a heat shrink, adhesive-lined connector, the kind with dual wall construction that seals out moisture once you apply heat to it. That's the difference between a connector that survives salt air and one that just looks like it should. You paid for the look. You didn't pay for the part that actually resists it. And that gap is invisible until the connector fails, usually right when you need it not to. The T-top joint takes that same shortcut somewhere far more dangerous. Dissimilar metals in direct contact, sitting in salt air, is a textbook setup for galvanic corrosion, and it works on a timeline, 2 to 3 seasons before it visibly pits a fitting, long before most owners think to inspect a joint that's never given them a reason to look. This isn't a cosmetic problem like the connector. It's structural. That joint is holding up the frame someone grabs to steady themselves in a chop, and by the time it fails, it's been failing quietly for years. Now, let's talk about what most owners actually pay when something fails. A marine shop or mobile mechanic bills $120 to $200 an hour for labor. That's not what the technician takes home. The techs themselves typically earn $25 to $35 an hour, sometimes into the mid-$40 range if they're experienced. The gap between what the tech earns and what you're billed is overhead, insurance, and margin, and it's the number that actually hits your card. On the water, 2 or 3 corrosion-driven failures in a season, a pump here, a connector there, a joint under the T-top that finally gives out, and you're already looking at $600 to $1,500 in labor alone. That's before a single replacement part gets added to the invoice. Here's where it compounds. A Rule livewell pump cartridge in this class runs $47 to $73, depending on the GPH rating. A full replacement pump runs $30 to $90, small numbers individually. But on a boat with subpar sourcing, these aren't one-time costs. They're seasonal. Same failure, same part, same bill, year after year. Because whatever caused it the first time never actually got fixed. It just got replaced. Let's go back to 2.1 amps, under 10 feet of wire, non-critical circuit. Under ABYC E-11, that circuit gets a 10% voltage drop margin because a livewell pump isn't safety critical the way a bilge pump or navigation light is. Those get a tighter 3% margin because if they underperform, you don't find out at the dock. You find out when it matters. Here's what that difference actually looks like on the water. A livewell pump running under margin just means weaker water flow. Your bait gets sluggish. Annoying, but survivable. A bilge pump on that same undersized wiring is a different story. Voltage drop means the pump spins slower than it's rated for, moving less water per minute right as you actually need it, in a following sea or after a hard rain when the bilge is already filling. That's why the margin gets cut to 3% instead of 10%. The standard isn't arbitrary. It's sized to the actual consequence of the circuit underperforming, and a connector that was never rated correctly doesn't know or care which circuit it ended up on. And here's the correction worth repeating, because it gets misquoted constantly, including by people who should know better. ABYC does not mandate tinned copper wire. Tinned copper is the de facto standard. It resists corrosion better in a marine environment, and plenty of technical guides reference it right alongside E-11 like it's part of the requirement. It isn't. The actual standard is about sizing and voltage drop. If someone tells you a boat is out of compliance because the wire isn't tinned, they're repeating a myth, not citing the rule. If you're starting to see where this is going, that the real cost of cheap rigging isn't the sticker price, it's what happens every season after. That's worth a follow before we get into the part that turns this from an annoying expense into an actual safety problem. Here's where it stops being about cost and starts being about risk. Wire that's undersized for its run, especially bundled with other cable or routed through an engine compartment, needs to be derated under E-11. That step gets skipped constantly. It means that wire is carrying more current than its insulation was ever rated to dissipate safely in a compartment that's already hot, already vibrating, already sitting a few feet from your fuel system. Bundle that wire tight against 3 or 4 other cables, the way it gets routed at the factory to save an hour of labor, and the heat has nowhere to go. That's the exact mechanism behind engine compartment electrical fires that get written up in insurance claims every season. A corroded connector costs you a service call. An underrated wire bundled into a hot engine bay is a different category of problem entirely. That $4,000 number doesn't come from one catastrophic bill. It comes from timing. The T-top joint hits its failure window at 2 to 3 seasons. The pump cartridge fails on its own shorter cycle. The connector goes whenever salt air finally gets past that chrome shell. None of these line up, which means on a boat with subpar sourcing, you're not paying one bill a year. You're paying a rotating bill, something failing on its own schedule almost every season, at $120 to $200 an hour plus parts every time. Add in the full rewire every owner eventually faces once enough of these small fixes stack up, and $4,000 a year stops being a headline number and starts being the average of what you'll actually spend, whether you track it that closely or not. Here's how to actually use this on the boat you're running right now. You don't need a marine surveyor for this part. Pop the panel under your helm and look at the connectors themselves before you look at anything else. Corrosion shows up as a dull green or white crust at the joint, not on the wire itself. That's the tell most owners miss because they're checking the wrong spot. If you see that crust, check whether the connector has a heat shrink sleeve or a bare crimp. Bare crimps in salt air are on borrowed time. Then find your bilge pump wiring specifically, since that's the 3% circuit, and follow it to where it exits the compartment. If it's bundled tight against 3 or 4 other cables with no gap for heat to escape, that's the derating issue in front of you, not a theory from a video. Takes 5 minutes, and it tells you more about what you actually own than anything in the brochure did. That chrome-plated connector from the top of this video, the one that looked expensive at the dealer, that's the whole story in miniature. It was built to survive the test drive, not the season. If this changed how you look at what's actually behind your dash, you know what to do. And next time you're at the dock, pop one panel open and look. You might not like what you find.